on September the 13th, although this is a new meeting. But I was anticipating a lot of motions from the minority, and we did have some motions for the minority. But if you remember, I said that I'll give the minority a chance to make their motions, and then I was going to make a motion that we have a time certain to vote. And so I want to make that motion time certain to vote. But if there is a motion from a minority, I would recognize that motion first.
Mr. Chairman, I'd like to make a motion to subpoena Mark Judge as a witness before our committee.
Okay. Let me hold.
And I'd be happy to speak to it, but I wanted
hold just a minute. Could you make your remarks short, please, and speak now, and then we will vote? Proceed.
Yes, Mr. Chairman. Thank you. We heard yesterday from an extraordinarily courageous, strong survivor, Dr. Christine Blasey Ford. Every one of us, I think, were riveted and powerfully impressed by her truth. We heard her provide details in that story that can be corroborated and other facts that can be uncovered if we hear from other witnesses who have very relevant, important knowledge about what happened to her on that evening in that room. The third person allegedly in the room was Mark Judge. Evidently, he has never been interviewed by the FBI. He has never been questioned by any member of our committee. He has never submitted a detailed account of what he knows. And so I move, Mr. Chairman, that we have him before this committee as a witness. He could be interviewed beforehand on a bipartisan basis. I recognize that he has submitted a cursory, conclusory 6-sentence letter, not even signed by him. It's from his attorney. And I believe we have a responsibility to subpoena, at the very least, Mark Judge before we move to vote. It is our constitutional duty to do everything we can to uncover the truth after hearing yesterday that compelling testimony from Dr. Blasey Ford. And we cannot, in good conscience, vote without hearing at least from Mark Judge. I would submit, with all due respect, Mr. Chairman, that there are other witnesses essential for us to hear from. We should hear from the other sexual assault survivors who have come forward with credible and powerful stories. And that will be also, in my view, necessary. But today I am moving that we subpoena Mark Judge.
Before we vote, I will read a letter that we received from Mark Judge last night. As I stated in my attorney, Barbara Van Gelder, September 18th, 2018 letter, I did not ask to be involved in this matter, nor did anyone ask me to be involved. We've told the committee that I do want to comment. When I told the committee that I do not want to comment about these events publicly, as a recovering alcoholic and a cancer survivor, I have struggled with depression and anxiety. As a result, I avoid public speaking. Brent Kavanaugh and I were friends in high school, but we have not spoken directly in several years. I do not recall the events described by Dr. Ford in her testimony before the U.S. Senate Judiciary Committee today. I never saw Brett act in a manner Dr. Ford describes. I am knowingly submitting this letter under penalty of felony. Mark Judge, witnessed by Barbara Van Gelder, and he has signed it.
Mr. Chairman, if I may respond.
On the motion?
Yes, on the motion. If I may respond, that letter is no substitute for an FBI interview.
The answer is no.
Mr. Graham.
And it is no substitute for testimony before this committee.
Mr. Lee. Mr. Cruz. Mr. Sass. Mr. Flake. Mr. Crapo. Mr. Tillis.
No.
Mr. Kennedy.
No.
Mrs. Feinstein.
Aye.
Mr. Leahy.
Aye.
Mr. Durbin.
Aye.
Mr. Whitehouse.
Aye.
Ms. Klobuchar.
Aye.
Mr. Coons.
Aye.
Mr. Blumenthal.
Aye.
Ms. Hirono.
Aye.
Mr. Booker.
Aye.
Ms. Harris. Mr. Chairman.
No.
Mr. Chairman, the votes are 10 yeas, 11 nays.
The motion is defeated. Now I move, as I said I was going to do, that we set the vote to report out Judge Kavanaugh's nomination at 1:30 p.m. today.
Mr. Chairman, point of order. Mr. Chairman.
Aye.
Mr. Graham.
Mr. Chairman, point of order.
Wait.
That's violating the rules of the committee.
Yes.
Yeah.
Mr. Lee. Mr. Cruz. Mr. Sass.
Well, this is.
Mr. Flake.
The
Mr.
ram
Crapo.
job continues.
Mr. Tillis. Mr. Kennedy. Mrs. Feinstein.
No.
Mr. Leahy.
No, because it violates the customs of this committee.
Mr. Durbin.
It violates them.
No.
Mr. Durbin. Mr. Whitehouse.
No.
Ms. Klobuchar.
No.
Mr. Coons.
No.
Mr. Blumenthal.
No.
Ms. Hirono.
I strongly object. This is just totally ridiculous. What a railroad job. The answer is no, no, no.
Mr. Booker. Ms. Harris. Ms. Harris.
They're not answering because this is so unfair, Mr. Chairman.
Aye.
Mr. Chairman, the votes are 11 yeas and 8 nays.
Okay. Motion carried. I'll go to my opening statement now. We have an agenda with 10 judges who are ready to be voted on. Brent Kavanaugh nominated to the Supreme Court. Jonathan Kobus nominated the 8th Circuit and 8 district court judges. We also have 2 bills on the agenda. We will hold over S 3178, the Justice for Victims of Lynching Act. We will vote on S 2785, the DTARE Act, sponsored by Senators Durbin and Graham. This bill combats offensive election interference by foreign adversaries by denying entry to any foreign national who has been deemed to engage in election interference. The amendment I'll be introducing makes clear that the Secretary of Homeland Security will make this decision on who has engaged in election interference in consultation with the Attorney General, the Director of National Intelligence, and the Secretary of State. Any foreign national who engages or conspires to engage in improper interference in our elections should not be allowed to enter our country under any circumstances except to stand trial. Yesterday, we heard testimony from Dr. Christine Blasey Ford and Judge Kavanaugh regarding sexual assault allegations that date back to when the two were in high school. It was difficult and emotional for both of them. At the end of the day, the 3 witnesses Dr. Ford named denied any knowledge of the event she described. Judge Kavanaugh forcefully denied the allegations. The alleged behavior is inconsistent with everything else we know about him. Hundreds of people, including women he knew in high school, attested to his character and fundamental decency as a person, both in high school and now. He is widely regarded as an excellent husband, father, friend, coach, professor, and judge. He has an exemplary record of being at the forefront of women's advancement in the legal profession, and he's been through 6 FBI full-time background investigations, and no issues of sexual misconduct were uncovered. It's a fundamental aspect of fairness and due process that the accuser have the burden of proving allegations. It's true yesterday's hearing was not a trial, but trials have rules based on common sense notions of fairness and due process, not the other way around. A person had allegations made against him in a public way, and his reputation and livelihood were at stake. It was only fair that his accuser had the burden of proof. In my opinion, this wasn't met. Hey, you folks that are photographers know that you're supposed to sit down. Maybe you just ought to leave the room if you don't know what the rules are. I found Dr. Ford's testimony credible and believe she's sincere in her version of the facts. But I also found Judge Kavanaugh's testimony credible and sincere. Ultimately, the existing evidence, including the statement of 3 alleged eyewitnesses named by Dr. Ford, refutes Dr. Ford's version of the facts. There is simply no reason to deny Judge Kavanaugh a seat on the Supreme Court on the basis of evidence presented to us. I reopened the hearing at the assistance of Dr. Ford and Judge Kavanaugh. Dr. Ford wanted to be heard, and we gave her that opportunity. Not one question to Dr. Ford was disrespectful in any way. She was treated with courtesy and dignity as I promised her. But the questions my Democrat colleagues asked Judge Kavanaugh were unequivocally and universally hostile. My colleagues first claimed that the Senate doesn't confirm Supreme Court nominees in midterm elections. The Washington Post fact checker said that's false. Indeed, Justice can we have quiet, please? I would expect the same quiet for other people on the committee when they speak. Anyway, indeed, Justice Breyer and Kagan were both confirmed in midterm elections. Then the second attempt was to argue that we needed to request all Judge Kavanaugh's executive that we did not request all of Justice Kagan's executive branch records. Indeed, her most recent and relevant executive branch records from the Solicitor General's office were not requested, even despite the fact that Judge Kavanaugh has spent the last 12 years on the second most Even though Judge Kavanaugh has spent the last 12 years on the second most powerful court in the country, issuing 307 opinions and joining hundreds of others, we received over 480,000 pages of documents from Judge Kavanaugh's time on the executive branch. This was more pages of such documents than the last 5 Supreme Court nominees combined. In short, it was the most thorough and transparent confirmation process at all. I'm going to put the rest of my statement in the record because I'm sure a lot of people are irritated right now, and I'll let them express that irritation. We'll go by seniority, so I'll call on Senator Feinstein and put the rest of my statement in the record.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm very disappointed that we're here today voting on this nomination, especially in light of the testimony that we heard just yesterday. My Republican colleagues spent their time at the hearing focused exclusively on policy and on partisanship and process. The majority argued that the sexual assault Dr. Ford experienced was nothing more than a Democratic smear campaign that I am allegedly orchestrating. My staff and I were accused of leaking Dr. Ford's letter, which we did not, We were accused of leaking Deborah Ramirez's letter, which we did not. We were said to have refused to participate in the partisan, quote, investigation, end quote. Yet it is the Republicans who have refused to talk to Debbie Ramirez or Julie Swetnick. Republicans also failed to mention Democrats were not notified and had no idea the chairman's staff had been communicating with Mark Judge, Patrick Smith, Leland Kaiser, and apparently at least 2 other individuals who have not been named. Instead, Democrats learned about this outreach when various letters or emails appeared in the press. And in one case, we learned about the Republican staff outreach at 10 p.m. the night before the hearing. Ironically, my colleagues on the other side of the aisle have gone so far as to say this whole situation was nothing more than a nefarious attempt at political theater. I understand why they did that. The Senate is a political body. However, I was shocked to see Judge Kavanaugh take the same tone and strategy. Candidly, in the 25 years on this committee, I have never seen a nominee for any position behave in that manner. Judge Kavanaugh used as much political rhetoric as my Republican colleagues, and what's more, he went on the attack. He yelled at Democrats for having the temerity to express our frustration for not having access to over 90% of his record, and said that some Democratic members were, quote, an embarrassment, end quote. He'd accused Democrats of, quote, lying in wait, end quote, and replacing, quote, advice and consent with search and destroy, end quote. He even went so far as to say that Dr. Ford's allegations were nothing more than, quote, a calculated and orchestrated political hit, fueled with apparent pent-up anger about President Trump and the 2018 election, end quote, and, quote, revenge on behalf of the Clintons, end quote. Unbelievable. This was not someone who reflected an impartial temperament or the fairness and even-handedness one would see in a judge. This was someone who was aggressive and belligerent. I have never seen someone who wants to be elevated to the highest court in our country behave in that manner. In stark contrast, the person who testified yesterday and demonstrated a balanced temperament was Dr. Ford. She gave powerful testimony about her experience of being physically and sexually assaulted by Brett Kavanaugh. She started by saying how she was terrified to be before the committee, but she felt it was her civic duty to tell us what happened to her. She recounted her experience, and I quote, "I tried to yell for help. When I did, Brett put his hand over my mouth to stop me from yelling. This is what terrified me the most and has had the most lasting impact on my life. It was hard for me to breathe, and I thought that Brett was accidentally going to kill me," end quote. Both Brett and Mark were drunkenly laughing during the attack. They seemed to be having a very good time, end quote. Another quote, "Brett's assault on me drastically altered my life. For a very long time, I was too afraid and ashamed to tell anyone these details. I didn't want to tell my parents that I, at age 15, was in a house without any parents present, drinking beer with boys. I convinced myself that because Brett did not rape me, I should just move on and pretend that it didn't happen," end quote. She was poised, she was credible, and she should be believed. Unfortunately, despite assuring Dr. Ford her allegations would be taken seriously and she would be treated respectfully, that is not what ultimately happened. As I noted in my statement yesterday, our colleagues on the other side of the aisle had their minds made up before one word was uttered. A week ago, the majority leader declared, quote, "In the near future, Judge Kavanaugh will be on the United States Supreme Court. So, my friends, keep the faith, Don't get rattled by all this. We're going to plow right through it, end quote. This was not about ensuring a fair process. This was about doing the bare minimum. And finally, to my Republican colleagues who are so upset about the time that has passed, let's be clear. Dr. Ford asked for confidentiality, and that's what I did. We all know that if I had referred her allegations to the FBI when she would not come forward, there would have been nothing to do. The FBI would have had an anonymous allegation with no name, no contact information, and no way to follow up. In addition, Dr. Ford's allegations were referred to the FBI on September 12th, over 2 weeks ago. If the president and the Republican majority had asked for the FBI to do an investigation at that time, like we asked, it would likely be finished by now. And most importantly, when Judge Kavanaugh has talked to Republicans repeatedly, none of us have spoken to or questioned Mark Judge, Patrick Smith, Leland Kaiser, or the polygraph examiner. None of us have talked to or questioned James Roach, Lynn Brooks, Liz Swisher, Tom Kaine, or Chris Dudley. Not one senator, as far as I know, has had the opportunity to or question Deborah Ramirez or Julie Swetnick. My colleagues are right that we should not rush to judgment, and it's not fair to assume Judge Kavanaugh is guilty without gathering the information. But it's equally unfair to have heard from a credible, poised, and brave witness and simply ignore what we heard and move forward immediately. I don't know Deborah Ramirez. I don't know whether her allegations are credible. I don't know Judy Swetnick. I don't know whether her allegations are credible. But I do know this. Dr. Ford provided credible, powerful testimony that deserves to be considered and not dismissed as a partisan smear campaign, which it was not. In my opening statement yesterday, I talked about the differences between Me Too and the Year of the Woman, and I highlighted the seriousness of sexual assault and harassment. I started out by saying I hoped we would do better and show women that our country, our committee, has in fact changed. This isn't a political battle for power, as some have said. This is a serious undertaking with serious allegations. While the Republican strategy is no longer attack the victim, it is ignore the victim. The entire country is watching now how we handle these serious allegations. It is, in fact, a real test for the United States Senate and for our country to see how we treat women, especially women who are survivors of sexual assault. I believe we can do better, and I hope we are better. Thank you. Mr. Chairman, I'd like to submit for the record a longer statement that addresses some of the attacks regarding my office's handling of Dr. Ford's allegations and the Republican administration.
Obviously, without objection, those will be included. Before I call on Senator Hatch, since this keeps coming up about the FBI investigation, I'd like to repeat what you've heard from me so many times, but I guess we never get this, get people understanding. We can't learn anything from the FBI that we can't learn ourselves. The Senate has our own constitutional duty and our own investigators to follow up on these allegations. I don't think we should discredit the Senate's constitutional duty of oversight as a co-equal independent branch of government. If the people on the other side of the aisle sincerely want an FBI investigation, I would ask why they did not notify me of Dr. Ford's then confidential letter way back in July so the FBI could weigh in. The FBI would honor confidentiality, and so would I. And I've had 38 years reputation of protecting constitutionality or confidentiality of whistleblowers. Another span of time for an FBI investigation is, as my Democrat colleagues have called for, or even more recently people outside calling for, would result in another time of brutal attacks on Dr. Ford and Judge Kavanaugh and their families. They don't deserve those sorts of vile threats that they're receiving, and it's unacceptable. Dr. Ford has stated no objections to an FBI investigation, so why has the need for an FBI investigation only come to our attention here in the last several days, probably less than 2 weeks? It's been 60 days since Dr. Ford's letter was made public. Then we've had some comment about why we didn't investigate Ramirez. When I learned of Ms. Ramirez's allegations, I acted immediately to investigate them, unlike our Democratic colleagues, some of whom sat on her story and apparently conducted their own private investigation rather than share it with the committee.
Mr. Chairman, excuse me for interrupting, but we have order.
Yeah.
Well, in fact, I would agree on the order. The order would be that we go back and forth, and apparently you're going to have 2 Republicans speaking and 1 Democrat. Is that what the chairman's doing?
That's what, absolutely. After I get done, and I'm not giving an opening statement, I'm explaining, as a chairman ought to explain, the work of the committee to people that don't seem to understand it. I'll call on Senator Hatch when I'm done, and then I'm going to call on you, Senator Leahy. When I learned of Ms. Ramirez's allegations, I acted immediately to investigate them. Unlike our Democrat colleagues, some of who sat on her story and apparently conducted their own private investigation rather than share it with the chairman. I first learned of her allegations when they became public in the article New Yorker, published late Sunday evening, September 23rd. My staff immediately contacted her counsel asking when she was available for an interview with committee investigators. The next afternoon, Monday, September 24, her counsel responded that Ms. Ramirez, quote, has accurately relayed what she recalls to the New Yorker. Her counsel, end of quote. Her counsel added, however, that, quote, she would welcome an investigation by the FBI into this investigation and would cooperate with such. On appropriate terms, she would also agree to be interviewed in person, end of quote. Over the 24th and the 25th of this month, my staff repeatedly asked Ms. Ramirez's counsel 2 questions before setting up a call to discuss her allegations so that such a call could actually be meaningful and useful. Whether, number 1, whether she had, quote, any other evidence, including other statements, in addition to those that are contained in the New Yorker article, end of quote. And 2, whether she was, quote, willing to provide her evidence, including her testimony, to committee investigators, end of quote. My staff repeatedly made clear that it welcomed, quote, the receipt of Ms. Ramirez or anyone else's evidence in the form of a letter or email to the chairman or ranking member, a letter or email from counsel to the chairman or ranking member, or a statement to committee investigators. Ms. Ramirez's counsel has still not provided any evidence to committee staff. If evidence emerged, we, of course, would proceed as appropriate. My staff also acted swiftly to set up an interview with Judge Kavanaugh. He unequivocally denied Ms. Ramirez's allegations. I regret that my Democrat colleagues again failed to timely bring this relevant information to his attention. The article makes clear that some Democratic senators have known of Ms. Ramirez's allegations for some time, and it quotes 1 Democrat member of the committee as saying this allegation, quote, should be fully investigated, end of quote. That is exactly what I have done and what could have been done easier if Senate Democrats had not kept the information to themselves. And then my last one will deal with the Sedgwick allegations. 2 days ago, we became aware of the allegations of Julie Swetnick. She claimed that Judge Kavanaugh was involved in a gang rape ring around Washington, D.C. area in the 1980s. My staff has been trying to obtain evidence of her claims and interview her since Sunday, 3 days before she made her allegations.
I'm going to just come away from the hearings for a moment, and I want to turn to Charlie Gasparino, who has news on the legal team around Elon Musk at Tesla. Charlie, what do you got?
He is hiring. He is what's known as lawyering up. He's hired a guy named Chris Clark, a former U.S. attorney who works at Lathan and Watkins, who also got Mark Cuban off of insider trading charges back in the day. But that's who he's hired recently to add to his legal team. We also know that Musk turned down a time-limited ban from the securities industry or from working at Tesla as part of this deal. So he really is looking to fight back. Hiring this guy, he now has 3 lawyers, but Chris Clark is key. As I said, he helped Mark Cuban get off of insider trading charges. And this is a big move. I think the stock will probably go higher on this. Musk is fighting back.
Okay. Charlie, thank you very much indeed. A timely report. And by the way, the Tesla stock is still down 11%, but this news has to be digested. All right. Greg Jarrett is with me, Fox News legal guy. Can I put it like that?
You can.
You were watching the hearings right there, and I saw Chairman Grassley sitting right next to Dianne Feinstein, and without looking at each other, they were going after each other. Yeah. Go.
Dianne Feinstein is responsible for the national disgrace, the abomination, the outrageous behavior of Democrats that have victimized not just Dr. Christine Ford, but Brett Kavanaugh and the American people. She's the one who had this information for 7 long weeks. She hid it. She concealed it. She could have provided it anonymously or confidentially to the committee. There could have been a private and confidential discussion with Dr. Ford. It didn't have to go this way. And so she bears the lion's share of the blame for transforming this, as Kavanaugh said, from advising consent to search and destroy.
Okay, hold on a second, Greg. Inside the chamber, the temperature is rising. There is real conflict there. And temperature is rising outside the chamber as well, because some Democrat senators, Blumenthal, Hirono, Harris, walked out of the hearing room, walked out of the committee room, and are now holding forth to the cameras outside. They are angry. They wanted a delay in this vote. They haven't got it. There will be a vote to get the Kavanaugh nomination out of the Judiciary Committee at 1:30 today. When that was implemented, when that was stated, it's a vote at 1:30, that's when the Democrats started to leave. I'm looking now at Hirono, Blumenthal, Harris, right in front of the microphones outside of the hearing room. The temperature is rising all over. May I go back to Tesla for a moment? That stock is, no, okay, can we listen in, please? I think this is important stuff.
I figured that would be to their advantage. What's not?
I'm sorry.
Whoever heard of a Supreme Court justice who's supposed to be on the court, to be impartial, to be that political? It was so nakedly political. And when he came up for his nomination hearings in 2006, there were a lot of concerns that he was a political operative. And he showed that in spades yesterday, that is what he is. And we do not need a political operative under this kind of cloud being on the United States Supreme Court.
You know, talking about coordination, what we saw yesterday was a coordinated effort to change the conversation away from the brave, courageous survivor of sexual assault, because her story was so intensely, undeniably credible, to a partisan attack. And what Judge Kavanaugh said yesterday was also a complete change from his saying initially at his first hearing, there's no Republican or Democratic side on the Supreme Court. Now it's a vast left-wing conspiracy out to get him. And that is demeaning and disrespectful to the brave survivors who have stepped forward. It makes them puppets and pawns when, in fact, they are blatantly...
Okay, I'm going to break away from that for a moment. I want to get back to Tesla. As you heard from Charlie Gasparino moments ago, Elon Musk is lawyering up. This is in the face of an SEC charge of fraud against Elon Musk for that tweet that he sent out where he said funding secured. The SEC says, no, it wasn't, and that's fraud. And investors were hurt.
Right.
Where are we going with this?
Well,
So right now the
SEC
stock's down 11%.
It's looking for a lifetime ban, and this has limited precedence. Very few times this has ever happened, and this is, as I said, excessive. If you look at what happened with Steve Cohen at SEC Capital, paid the largest fine for insider trading, alleged insider trading in SEC history. He was basically banned for 2 years from taking an executive role. Martha Stewart went to jail. 5-year ban. And I can go on as well. Mark Cuban acquitted of wrongdoing, and he's taking up the same lawyer.
Okay, the same lawyer. So he's lawyered up.
He's fighting back.
He's fighting back.
That's
okay.
From Charlie Gasparino.
Greg Jarrett, legal guy, he covers both the Kavanaugh hearing and Tesla. Jack of all trades here. What do you make of this SEC charge against Tesla, against Elon Musk? He's in trouble.
Yeah, his only defense is misfeasance as opposed to malfeasance. That is to say that, oh, gee, I just kind of screwed up, but there was no venal or malicious intent. I wasn't trying to profit by this. I wasn't trying to manipulate the stock price. But look, as a corporate officer, he has a fiduciary responsibility to be honest.
Right.
And the SEC is going after him, accusing him of not being honest.
I was surprised when I saw the SEC spokesperson stand up yesterday and say, by the way, Elon Musk used the expression 420 as the price that which he wanted to take Tesla private.
Yeah.
420 is the word used often for a reference to marijuana. And the SEC guy said Musk did that. He called it a 420 to amuse his girlfriend.
Yeah. And that is why misfeasance would be a little bit better. It basically says, you know, I was negligent. But there was nothing intentional on my behalf. My words were misinterpreted. That's his best defense.
So he's lawyered up. That means he's fighting, and that means it spins itself out.
Sure. And it'll spin itself out for a very long time.
But he has to raise an enormous amount of money.
Yes, right now, liabilities are almost $2 to $3 billion ahead of assets or cash, or basically cash assets you can turn into cash, and convertibles due in a few months, $200 million, then another convertible next year at $1 billion if he doesn't hit a stock price limit, and he's far, far away from that.
It's very hard to understand how someone would lend that kind of money
highly
to
indebted
a company where the guy's being charged with fraud.
Very cloudy right now.
And his future is cloudy. I mean, the stock is still down 11%. You're still around 272. Should tell everyone that earlier this morning, Citigroup came out and said, look, that stock is the new target will be $225 per share, way below where it is even now, and it's down 11%. Big trouble for... Oh, I'm sorry, wait a second. I've got some more breaking news. Edward Lawrence is with us. Edward, you've got breaking news on trade. Tell us, please.
On trade, we're talking about the U.S.-Mexico agreement. I've heard from two sources, one on the House side, one on the Senate side, who are familiar with the trade negotiations that have been going on, saying they are expecting as early as today to get the final language of a U.S.-Mexico trade agreement. As you know, that was going to be the revised NAFTA, but Canada sort of fell off of that this week. The president rejecting a last-ditch effort by Justin Trudeau, Prime Minister of Canada, to try and talk this out. President saying that Canada just wasn't serious. They have a number of demands that just couldn't be met. But now we've learned that as early as today, that final language is going to be in. That language does have to be to congressional committees by the 30th of September, by Sunday, in order to keep that fast-track timeline going. They would like to get that fast-track timeline in order to get this revised agreement signed before the new Mexican president comes into office. Varney?
Okay, thanks very much indeed, Edward. That is relatively positive news on trade, I would say, not having much immediate impact on the stock market as we speak. We're down about 8 points for the Dow Jones Industrial Average. I want to bring you Lindsey Graham, the senator there, who had something to say about these proceedings in the Kavanaugh Judiciary inquiry. Let's roll tape on that, please.
Cory Gardner received an anonymous letter with no postmark and he brought it over to the committee several days ago about an alleged incident in 1998 in a restaurant with no details of who it was and no postmark, but he felt like he should turn it over. All I can say is an anonymous letter, if that can make news and affect the outcome of a committee, we're really going to destroy the process. What bothers me about NBC is that you ran with it. And what bothers me more, somebody on their side gave it to you. You would never have done that with a Democratic nominee. To my friends at NBC, don't write off conservative concerns about NBC to Roger Ailes. You need to think long and hard about what you did. About the invitation, the customs of the committee. Chairman Grassley bent over backward to make sure that Ms. Ford could be heard at a time of her choosing, at a location of her choosing, and I was stunned to hear from Ms. Ford, Dr. Ford, that she did not know it was available to her to testify in California under the conditions that she would request. I find that almost impossible to believe, and I don't doubt her, but I've got communications where that offer was made numerous times. Why wasn't it accepted? It's inconsistent with the debacle we witnessed yesterday, and it's inconsistent with moving this thing forward. It's all about delay. So to my good friend, Senator Leahy, I don't want to hear any more about the customs of this committee. I don't want to hear any more about an FBI investigation. If you really wondered what the FBI could or should do, you would have come forward in a timely manner. The FBI is not going to tell us any more than we know now. As to the accusations, I went through all 5, and I would say this. There are no statute of limitations in Maryland regarding sexual assault. So if somebody wanted to pursue this case, they could go to the appropriate officials in Maryland if you could find out what town it happened and when it happened, and you can make a complaint against Judge Kavanaugh. And if that complaint is taken to a court and he's convicted, I'll be the first one to say we need to look at Judge Kavanaugh. I will be in the NBA before that happens. That's the way you handle allegations. Everything about this, in my view, has been the lowest point of the committees since I've been here, and it's just rank with politics. And nobody really cared about Dr. Ford, and nobody really cared about Brett Kavanaugh. And when I hear my Democratic colleagues openly say, if we can delay this past the midterms, we take back the Senate, we keep this Senate unfilled, this seat unfilled. Disgusting.
Have you spoken with Senator Flake? Word there from Senator Lindsey Graham. Disgusted. Strong stuff indeed. Gail Trotter's with us, Judicial Crisis Network attorney. Gail, thank you very much for being with us. Seems to me there is a very strong reaction developing and brewing here to these last-minute accusations and the